Hi. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm very excited, and the theater's so beautiful. But I better pop into the conversation because I'll get in trouble otherwise. So the mesh, first of all, the mesh is a fundamental shift in our relationship with the stuff in our lives, in our personal lives, in our communities, and in our organizations. It's essentially a movement towards better things easily shared. So we're going to start to see the design of things that are designed to be shared. We have a history of some of those things that we've shared through life. They are, transportation, physical buildings, public parks, of course, entertainment venues, and then what I refer to as the mother of all share platforms, reminding us that sharing also that the materials are in fact perishable in many cases and finite. So the key ingredients, sort of the perfect storm of meshiness, comes from these three things in a cocktail together. It's essentially these mobile devices that we seem to all be dripping with. They're web-enabled mobile devices, social networks, and also physical goods. So we can basically start to locate each other in time and space, and we can also begin to locate, it's what Clay Shirky calls legibility. So for example, with Google Maps and Street Views and buildings being able to be defined, homes can read into a network or can be picked up on cell phones, cars, other forms of transportation. And then with RFID, even though Bill McDonough really is hoping for a cradle-to-cradle solution for tracking, hopefully we'll get that soon, but we have the ability to track physical goods, and so we can find each other in physical goods in space. It's a setup for something. It's a setup for taking the friction out of sharing. And so for me as an entrepreneur, I have trained myself to take sort of a better view, to take a higher perspective, and to stop a little bit. When I see so many things changing at once, there's a real opportunity to rethink the materials, the product offering, the way we go to market, the way we provide service to people, and also the expectations of people who are our clients, or if we're nonprofit doing nonprofit work, the people that we're serving. There's just really big other opportunities. And so for me, the mesh came out of this realization that we're in a different moment. It's sometimes better to use a little quick example, so I will. I'm sure everybody here has heard of the company Zipcar. They have taken car sharing, which is not at all created by them, but was actually designed by another company, many companies actually in Europe for many years. They have taken it and branded it and scaled it in a way that's really interesting, and so they're the largest car share company in the world. They did this, hold it. They did this as a function. They have started to pick certain cars, design tools, for example, that allowed them to create this Zipster phenomenon. So they packaged, like marketers, they packaged an experience, made a brand, and created, the minis. They picked cars that were sexy and fun that wouldn't look like the typical rental car. But the other thing that they did, which I believe is the fundamental thing that makes them meshy, and B, makes them actually a winning company and scaling and scalable, is that they realize that they are basically an information company disguised as a car company, that they are fundamentally the platform that was built. It tries to understand very well where the cars are located, whether they're clean or not. If they're not, who's going to clean them, coordinates with their partners, understands for us as members where we are, which physical location, whether we're running late, whether we have a history of running late, if the next person is urgently waiting for a car, all these sorts of things the system is able to incorporate, and that is actually fundamental to them scaling this system. So they also receive, and this is central to mesh companies as well, and I think a good follow-on in general from the whole noise business is tons of data. So if you buy a car one time, if you buy a car one time and sell it, there's one interchange and one transaction. But when you're, sharing and you're telling your friends about the car and you're, in and out of different kinds of vehicles and all these sorts of things, so much more data gets generated, and the ability to interpret that data through the noise to a signal of something that can be converted to value is really what it's all about. And so feedback, listening well, understanding the tools, and understanding how to convert all the data and the interaction and the trust that people give you to real value. And so the mesh is, for me, it came out of my observation and my feeling that the stuff in my life started to be noise. And it was all around me, you know, the stuff in my personal life, and it was just, I started to kind of get overwhelmed with it and declare that I was full. And so as a function, and as an entrepreneur, by way of confession, I also felt somewhat part of the problem that, you know, I'm, again, making businesses that are selling more stuff. And so the brakes seemed like an appropriate thing to apply. But in a practical way, I would say, and even here with, I was very excited that Andrew invited me, and even here, because we have such an incredible group of people who are focused on changing the world and making the world a better place, changing habits are really hard, and we're all really busy people. And so, you know, somebody in the group, I've forgotten the person's name and I'm sorry, came up with the idea to do a biodiesel bus from New York, and we were going to take the bus, you know, a long journey from New York to Camden, Maine. And in the end, for probably reasons of logistics and other sorts of things, we just couldn't put together the right number of people to make it make sense. And so I'm not like terribly surprised, but at the same time, you know, it points to something. And I think that for me, you know, changing habits is hard, and generally it usually happens as a function of our pants being on fire. And so if your pants are on fire, it turns out that you do change. But usually, prior to that, there's a buildup. And so for me, the challenge, and I think for all of us, and certainly as we think about, you know, the conversations that took place this morning with organizations sharing data and creating open applications to be able to make a data that's an application that's organized around water to make sense for agriculture and other things. I think the whole idea of sharing, I mean it in a very broad sense. And we have instances in our lives of making sharing feel irresistible. I think all of us have had that experience. But how do we make that happen broadly, and what's required to do that? I think there's a trade-off. We're trading basically less stuff for more experiences. And if we think about things like Netflix or Pandora, we have, over the last 10-ish years, really shifted our relationship. Things that are now physical goods, you know, we have a much bigger access to music and to film, for example, without owning it. And there are whole generations of people, and there are whole cultures of people who very much are on the track of, and I would say may well skip over ownership altogether, in the same way that we saw people skip over, like I was in the photography business, we saw, you know, whole markets, China, for example, skip over film and go straight to digital. We saw whole markets skip over landlines and go straight to mobile. Well, you know, are people going to skip over ownership and go straight to access? And so I start to look at these things and say, another phenomenon that I really have been fascinated by, and it has to do, a lot of the mesh for me, it has to do with, we already have a lot of stuff. How do we use what we have more effectively? How do we use more of what we have? So does anyone know what percentage of the day, the average in the US, what's the average amount of time the car is used across the US? Who said 8%? 8? Yes, 8%. Thank you, and I'll pay you later. That means 92% of the time it's just sitting around, and we organize our cities. A disproportionate amount of our incomes and our tax base goes to supporting cars. And so you're seeing, you know, we know that Zipcar hangs around, but at the same, and is growing very well and providing incredible service to people. We're also starting to see things called peer-to-peer car sharing. And peer-to-peer car sharing is essentially using the same, what I like to call underwear, the technology that goes into car sharing, into our own cars, so that you can basically use your neighbor's car and vice versa. Really interesting. So companies like Relay Rides here, Spride, and Whipcar in the UK. And it's a really interesting phenomenon. Similarly, there's over 30% vacant commercial space in the US. The recession is still hanging around, as we know. And so pop-up stores, is everybody familiar with pop-up venues, pop-up grocery, pop-up restaurant phenomenon? So it's essentially coming in for a very discrete period of time and creating an experience and bringing attention, which is a really wonderful thing, because the other piece is when you have perishability, it creates urgency. And at least in business, two of the most compelling words in business are always sold out. And the ability to do that in a way that it allows small businesses to take a venue. It allows other established businesses to maybe try out, who are trying a flanker brand or a new product, to take a place and to play with the market and to really get feedback in interesting ways. And so a quick example is there's a company called Plane Shop. It's in Glasgow in the airport. And their strategy is slightly different. Once a month, they just change brands wholesale. So they do Jimmy Choo, then they do Nike, then they do Steelcase, then they do Patagonia. And then the company, the brand, actually benefits greatly because they get an incredible amount of information back, how people responded. The venue itself, Plane Shop, has an exciting every month new change of whole scene, so that brings in lots of people. And for those of us that are participating, it's also kind of nice because there's a lot of throughput. You get a real opportunity to see what you like or don't like. And not all of these are about consumption or buying things. Many of them are experiential. In ecology, there's a moniker that I really like that is waste equals food, which essentially is saying that the waste from one system becomes food for the next system. So if you have a really balanced system, essentially there is no waste. We apply this in the mesh in terms of if we look at what we used to call waste, if we squeeze just a little bit on what we used to call waste, we discovered that in fact there was a lot of value. And so we've been the way that we've been treating what we call waste I think is changing very rapidly. And so this is about embracing the reverse value chain. It's essentially, we know about the forward value chain, taking raw materials and bringing them to market, making something of value and making a profit. And then since the metrics have historically stopped there, so too has the responsibility and the interest. But going back to the whole notion of sustainability and all of that, here's a photo of the plastic bottle in its natural habitat. And what I like about this is an example of a relationship with a furniture company called Emeco that makes this chair that's called the 111 Navy chair. The chair is made in partnership with Coca-Cola from 111 plastic bottles recovered. So, again, a $230 chair sold all over the world. And Coca-Cola is not shy. They're telling everybody. So another thing to see here for me in terms of, and I think for all of us, is that companies are starting to realize that their brand equity and their profit is also going to be tied to the reverse value chain, which requires a lot more openness and a lot more thought about a very expansive ecosystem to take care of the reverse value chain. This is Coca-Cola, again, with a friend's company in San Francisco called Rickshaw Bags. And again, they were very proud to put their logo there. And so companies also are realizing, and it's a real challenge for all of us, it's also a huge opportunity, that advertising is not convincing anyone. In fact, in many cases, the more you advertise, the worse it gets. What is convincing people are, their friends and their friends of friends. So how people are treated, instances about a particular service that took place in a small town, say Camden, Maine, can be spread very rapidly through the world by these social networks and by people actually then also sharing their experiences. It creates a really interesting challenge for organizations who have historically tried to so-called control the message and have a few people who were in charge of being communicators, which was essentially spinning the story. And now what we have as a challenge is hiring and training people in a way that they can be authentic and fresh and responsive and human and just respectful with customers and with partners so that we use some of these tools in a way that actually does really leverage the brand. Because what we know is that delight is contagious, that if people really are happy, they're in the double rainbow experience, they're thrilled. But it also works the other way, guys, and if somebody's kind of miserable, you're going to hear about it in spades. And so that, this challenge, I think, will call all of our attention. The other thing is in nature abhors a vacuum, and so do markets. And so holes will appear, and things will grow up in those holes. And some of them will work and some won't. But the great thing about the mesh, I realized just really quickly, when we did Ophoto, which was in 1999, I raised just under $60 million. In doing the book and doing the reflection of what we have as our inheritance in terms of infrastructure today, both technology and physical infrastructure, I think I could do the same thing that we did on the $60 million for 10%. And it's really incredible. So here we have a company that showed up in a little crack that's becoming kind of a big thing. I imagine people in the room have heard of Etsy. It's a Brooklyn-based company. The people who started it were watching what was going on with crafters on eBay. eBay was scaling vertically and geographically. They couldn't attend to all these customers so well, and so the founders of Etsy decided, here's a market that's really exciting, I'm going to go after it. And they've created an incredible community. It's a private company, and I'm not even sure that the data that I have is accurate, so I'm not going to spread rumors. But they're doing extremely well. It's a profitable company, and they're growing, I would say, more than 5% a year, and significantly so. And it's grown pretty much of its own because the community is very vocal. It's grown with no advertising and in a very kind of organic way. So the mesh in this platform that we have allows us to do things where we can, what I call define, refine, and scale. It allows us to create products or to test programs, then to go out into the market or with our client base and get feedback. And that feedback, if it tells you to refine the offering, but to not scale it until you refine it. Another way to avoid incredible waste, because I've certainly been part of scaling things that were ahead of their time. So I would just want to welcome all of you to the mesh. I think we're all on the ride together. And I would just encourage you to try some of these services. When I was trying to convince myself not to write the book, which I failed at, what I was doing was I built a database of companies that I would find, or organizations or programs anywhere in the world in about 30 different categories, and I made note of them. And I ended up making that database into a directory, and I launched it about a month before the book came out. And it's already more than doubled. So you might find that you want to add your organization in there, or if you're looking for ideas or people to partner with, I would encourage you to go to, the site is meshing.it, and just feel free to add your comments and join the community. That's it. Thank you very much.